Hi folks, Will from MinIO here, and I'm going to continue talking in this video about transforms with Object Lambda. In this video, we're going to talk about requesting a transformed object, and then we're also going to show you how to configure MinIO to accept these object requests. Let's go ahead and take a look. When it comes time to request the transformed object, the secret sauce is all in the ARN. Now, an ARN is an Amazon resource name. This is just a quick reminder, MinIO is fully S3 compatible, so we are using this Amazon resource name paradigm to actually call our requests here. The formatted ARN is going to look like something like ARN :MinIO :S3 object lambda, and then there's function and webhook. The majority of this ARN is standard. So anytime I deploy a new webhook, it's going to be ARN MinIO S3 object lambda something webhook. The only change is going to be that function, which is going to correspond to the deployed name of the webhook. And we'll show you how to set that deployed name in just a minute. But function in this case is going to be the piece that changes. So when I make my request, ARN MinIO S3 object lambda, function, reverse, re-encode, whatever I'm going to call it, and then webhook. When I'm including this ARN, it is included as an extra header named Lambda ARN. So here is a little bit of Python code. You can do this in any programming language, any language that can speak HTTP and can put an extra header in the call. This is all you have to do. So request parameters, Lambda ARN, ARN MinIO, And then when I do my client get object, I'm requesting from the transforms bucket. I am requesting the sample text object, and I am handing in this extra request parameter Lambda ARN. By the way, this is where I would also put any additional data that I wanted to hand along. So I might say, if I have a form data that's coming in, I would add those as request parameters to this call. Okay? And then they will get handed along to my webhook. So the last piece of all this is now I need to configure Object Lambda to actually allow MinIO to process that ARN. Now, the easiest, the most recommended way to do this is via an environment variable. So we need to add two environment variables to our environment, MinIO Lambda webhook enable and MinIO Lambda webhook endpoint. Now, the last word of the name of the environment variable is the name of the actual webhook. So my two environment variables are going to be MinIO Lambda webhook enable function on to make sure that it's running, and then MinIO Lambda webhook endpoint function, and then the URL of the endpoint. Now, you're probably going to want to use things like HTTPS and some other stuff like that, but just a very simple example here. The key here again is function. This enables the ARN lookup and defines the endpoint URL. Okay, so you want to make sure you've enabled it. You want to make sure that the endpoint is there as well. Now, as long as you have unique names, you can have many, many Lambda functions. And here's the fun part. If I call a bucket, any bucket, and I don't include the ARN, it's not going to call the webhook. The webhook just sits there and runs. Okay, it only gets called when I add that request param to my client call. So I can have multiple of these, and they're not attached to any individual bucket, which is great. So a quick note on security. Obviously, you don't want just anybody accessing your webhook. The first line of defense, of course, would be to put your webhook behind your firewall. MinIO is probably also running behind your firewall because you don't want MinIO out there publicly accessible in the first place. It's going to be behind a proxy. You're not going to access it directly from the internet. So since you're behind a firewall, that's your first line of defense. Second line of defense is to have some authentication between MinIO and your webhook. Obviously, your client's not going to authenticate to your webhook because your client's never talking to the webhook. So you just need MinIO to authenticate. And you can authenticate in one of two ways. You can either use an auth token, or you can use MTLS with a cert and key. Okay, so if we're using an auth token, MinIO Lambda webhook auth token, and then the last field is the name of the webhook. Similarly, MinIO Lambda webhook client cert, MinIO Lambda webhook client key, the last field is the name of the webhook again. So this links it to your other webhook information that you did to stand up your webhook and make it available. If you need more documentation on this, you can follow the link that you see here. Now, environment variables are preferred. They are static. You don't lose them if there's a catastrophe. But if you are going to just stand something up, you're going to turn it on, turn it off, you just want to test it or whatever, you can deploy via MinIO command line. So the endpoint value is required for this. It defaults to on when you first run it, so you can turn it off, but it's going to default to on. And again, this keyword function right here after Lambda webhook should be replaced with a unique name, whatever you want to call it. So here's our mcadmin config set local Lambda webhook colon name of your webhook. And then you're going to have your endpoint as usual. You're going to have enable. You can still do auth tokens. You can still do client certs, client keys. This can all be done through MC. Very, very handy. After you've actually stood this up, MinIO is going to ask you to do a restart. So you can do that with a MinIO admin service restart. Very easy to do. You can also use the MC command to get a list of any objects Lambda you've got deployed out there. So MinIO admin config get local Lambda webhook, or get whatever your MinIO server is, Lambda webhook, will give you the Lambda webhook enable off. It'll give you the sort of the basic format, and then it'll give you each individual Lambda webhook that you've deployed. If you deploy this via the environment variables, what you get out is a little bit different. You'll see the environment variables actually commented in this output, and a little hashtag, and then the environment variables themselves. It's great. So you can get a list of all of your deployed objects Lambda that you've got running as well. So if you've been doing any event handling, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, event handlers and bucket notifications, those also use webhooks. Right, but that's kind of where the similarities end, right? Event handlers are bound to a particular bucket, whereas object Lambda handlers are bound to the deployment as a whole and can be called against any bucket. Event handlers always respond to a predetermined list of events, whereas object Lambda handlers can be invoked arbitrarily whenever you need to call them. An event handler environment variable also starts with MinIO notify, whereas our object Lambda handler environment variables start with MinIO Lambda. So that's where all the differences lie. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it and would like to reach out with us, you can use any of the methods you see here on the screen. You can also Slack us on slack.min.io, or just hit a comment here on the video. Thanks, and we'll see you for the next one.